Hey everybody, this is Bad at Keeping Secrets. Today I have Liz from Liz and Molly talking about her book, Big Feelings. Liz, will you give me a brief bio of, or kind of, this is your second book, about how you got interested in exploring feelings and emotions and sort of helping people work through them?
Yeah, so I grew up, my parents are immigrants, very stoic. There was not a lot of emotional expression in my household growing up. In high school, I had kind of a hard time. And I remember at one point even mentioning therapy to my parents, and the concept was totally foreign to them. Like they were just like, why would you talk to a stranger? What is there to talk about? You have a good life. We live in a nice house, things like that. So those were the messages that I had and really internalized. And then after college, where I studied math and economics, because those were like solid quantitative fields to study, got a job as an economic consultant and just really hated it. And it was surprising to me, which looking back seems obvious, but it was surprising to me how I couldn't just will myself to enjoy it and will myself to do it every day. I started getting migraines. Like, I think I was just repressing my emotions so much, they started manifesting physically. And so then I eventually just completely burnt out of that job and didn't know what I wanted to do next. And that was, I always call it like a forced reckoning of, okay, I have feelings. I can't ignore them. It's just not going to you can't work in a field that you fundamentally don't like, especially for 40, 50 years. And so that was how I was kind of forced into better understanding what was going on within me.
I think in the live we talked a little bit about trying to figure out what you did like, or where the sort of loopholes of enjoyment were in your job in economics. But can you talk a little bit about the importance of maybe finding out, or how you figured out what it was you didn't like?
Yeah, I'm actually really grateful for that experience. Now I can say that like 10, 15 years later. At the time it was horrible. But so psychologists sometimes differentiate, or they say that we have multiple selves. So there's this ideal self, which is the version of you that is fulfilled, that is doing what you love to do. And then there's the ought self, which is everything you ought to be doing. And so at the time, and generally we're more happy when we live our ideal self life. And at the time, I was definitely living the ought life. Like, I should have a successful job. I should put on a Banana Republic pantsuit, and I should go into a tall building and like do all the traditional corporate stuff. And I'm actually really glad that I had that experience and hated it so much, because I think it allowed me to like let go of that self much more easily than if I had never pursued it. I think it would be more likely that I still sometimes would be like, maybe I should have been a lawyer, or I should have pursued this path. So yeah, I think we underestimate the value in really clearly understanding where we don't want to invest our energy, because it just makes your decision set smaller and makes it easier to figure out where you do want to invest your time.
Was there something about the day-to-day of that you remember thinking like, just this is gut wrenching?
Yeah, so there were two things. There was one, which is, so the way economic consulting firms work is law firms hire them to calculate how much money big companies should pay each other. And so, especially as a very junior person there, I would basically get to the office at 9 in the morning and then often be waiting till like 5 or 6 for whatever I needed to do to come in from the law firm. And then I would have to be at the office till 1 or 2 doing that work. And so to me, it was like,
Wait, 1 or 2 in the morning?
yeah. So it
Oh,
was like extreme hours. And then it just felt so meaningless to have to be in the office when there wasn't work to do. Like it just, it was like, it's almost worse. Anyone who's had a job where you literally are watching the time tick down and you're like, okay, it's 9:05, it's 9:06, it's 9:10. It's excruciating. So that was bad. And then I started working there after the financial crisis. And one of the cases we were working on was basically a lot of older people had lost all their pensions when a big bank went bankrupt. And we were trying to make a case for why they shouldn't get any money back. So it was also just like fundamentally kind of soul sucking.
So you kind of brushed on this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about how sort of your enjoyment of charts and graphs, how you started the practice of, because now you sort of use those, sort of subvert those mediums to kind of talk about this, talk about feelings and emotions and sort of these nebulous things that are floating around us. And it's really like an effective strategy in understanding them. Can you kind of talk about the process of how you think about making these sort of illustrations?
Yeah, I so definitely started like I don't have any art or design background. And so I just started with what I knew, which was charts. I actually started creating like my very first, I don't even want to call them illustrations, visual images. I made an MS Paint because that was what I had. So they were hideous. But so yeah, I think one of the things is just like starting where you are with the tools that you're familiar with and then trying to use them in new ways. And now I find, yeah, it's just like it helps me process my own emotions. So people also often ask like, where do you get inspiration? And it's usually just whatever I'm feeling. And then somehow it's still most comfortable for me to express those in these like more quantitative ways that I have a background in. Just it feels like safe and known and comes most naturally to me. So it's like I take whatever the left brain, creative brain, and then express it through the right brain.
No, since I don't have that sort of area of expertise underpinning how to organize my thoughts, I love the translations in sort of that language. So the book, if we talk a little bit more about big feelings, wait, can we start with your first book? Can you tell us a little bit about the first book?
Yeah, so the first book is called No Hard Feelings, The Secret Power of Embracing Emotions at Work, and came out in February 2019 and looks specifically at the workplace. So how can we harness emotions to improve our leadership abilities, to craft better teams, to improve communication, things like that. And then the second book, Big Feelings, is much more, it's much more personal, and it looks at basically hard feelings. So we wrote the first book, had experiences in our personal lives that were really difficult, but then also we're hearing from people like, you know, I think often people don't have an opportunity to talk about what they're feeling at work. So we would do workshops, and then afterwards they became kind of therapy sessions. And it was this view into, whoa, there are really thorny situations. People feel burnout, people struggle with perfectionism, people have a lot of regrets in their personal and professional lives. And that all inspired the second book.
Can we just rest really briefly on so what do you think the specific outcomes, like I can project what I think the specific outcomes are for like embracing feelings and emotions at work. But can you talk a little bit about sort of why that was important for you guys?
Yeah, so some of it was we essentially set out to write the book that we both wished we had when we entered the workforce. So Molly, my co-author, had a really similar experience where she got a job she thought she always wanted. She'd worked hard for it. And then it was like just not a supportive work environment. And she also burnt out of it. And we both had so much guilt around not having succeeded in these roles. But then looking back, I don't think I would have ever been in my first job long term, but I also never knew that I could do something like go to my manager and say, hey, I actually like the writing parts of this job. Can I take on more projects that have to do with writing? And so it very much it's also, I will say too, like, it just made sense to do a business book. Our publisher was like, you should start with a business book. That's kind of like a nice, safe, like lucrative entry point into book writing. And I think that platform actually made it possible for us to write this second, more personal, more narrative book.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the 7 emotions.
Yes.
How you came up with the 7 emotions from the previous book.
Yeah, so like I said, we published this book called No Hard Feelings. And then I would say 6 months later, Molly and I both had really hard experiences. I was losing my father-in-law to cancer. I was also commuting 3 hours a day at the time. Like there was just a lot that was not good for my mental health. And Molly was dealing with chronic pain issues that led her to feel a lot of despair. I think the biggest thing we stumbled upon was suddenly changing what we didn't change how we felt. Like we had sort of hit these sort of like emotional points where it was like, I don't even know how to pull myself out of this. And so we wrote down all the emotions we were experiencing at the time and then surveyed people who had read our first book, who followed us on social media. And that allowed us, based on the responses there, allowed us to get it down to these 7 emotions that we cover in the book. One thing that's interesting is people sometimes point out like, comparison, which is one of the chapters, is not an emotion, it's a behavior. But when we ask people about envy, which is often what happens when you compare yourself to someone else, there was kind of a response. But when we said comparison, there was this overwhelming response. And so it was interesting even to see that even though people could identify the behavior that they were engaging in, they still had somehow detached it. Like, I think they were repressing the emotional response so much that the connection between like comparison and regret and envy wasn't obvious to them. So in some cases, we use the word that evoked the most response in people. So like perfectionism, uncertainty, whereas perfectionism is really about a fear of failure and uncertainty is really about anxiety. But we wanted to meet people where they were. And it seemed like it was sometimes more the behavior versus the actual feeling.
I did not notice that.
Yeah.
Some
people are sticklers. So some people be like, this is not an emotion.
Oh, I didn't even think about it. I mean, but can we talk a little bit about comparison? Because I think that's something, I mean, all the emotions basically, I personally feel like I try to rip or push down and have guilt for feeling. But I think all of my life, I think that I've had issues with jealousy, and it's definitely something I feel like everyone, when you tell them like, oh, I struggle with comparison, it's hard not to imagine them judging you for it. Mm-hmm. And can you talk, I think you both talk about it pretty frankly. I think there's a story about Molly and pregnancy, I think that that you open with, but can you talk about comparison and why you think comparison maybe is something we struggle with?
Yeah. It's very natural. We're kind of hardwired to look around and see how we stack up to people. So humans are a relational species. The way that we know, even, sort of seemingly fundamental things about ourselves, like how do you know you're tall? Because you are taller than other people. How do you know you're good at something? Because you have more success metrics or whatever. There's like, you've gotten more praise for it than someone else. How do you know you're kind? Because you've seen people be not kind. So again, like even these descriptors are based in comparison. So it's not, I think there's this common trope now that if you get off of Instagram, you will be free of feeling bad because you're comparing yourself to others. It can definitely help, but fundamentally it's just something we do. But we do it in a, I think we often don't know of the common pitfalls. So research shows that when we compare ourselves, we tend to compare our weaknesses to other people's strengths. And we also tend to compare ourselves to this like mishmash of 15 other people. And so we create this fantasy person. So instead of saying like, my kitchen isn't as nice as my neighbor's kitchen, but, my living room is nicer. It's just like my kitchen isn't as nice as my neighbor's kitchen. I'm not in Italy like my friend who's posting on Instagram. I'm not as fast of a runner as my other friend from college. And so it's like, you just take all these other things and mash them into one comparison, as opposed to comparing yourself more in a more truthful way, which is like, I have this sometimes where I'll see one of my friends gets like a promotion, or one of my friends recently got a promotion and now manages a department of 200 people. And I had this moment of like, oh, that's really cool and prestigious. Like, why don't I manage a department of 200 people? And then I kind of talked myself down from it by saying, I hate being in meetings back to back. Like I think I would actually really be miserable in this job. And it's also in a field that I'm not interested in. And she works hours that are just like, she doesn't have a lot of flexibility in her schedule, all of these things that I really value. And so even though there was this initial like flare up of jealousy, it was useful for me to be like, I need to actually compare the nitty gritty as opposed to just be like, I don't do this, I'm a terrible person. It's like, no, I've made choices that have led me away from that. And I'm very happy with those choices.
I think that there's like a surprising plot twist in the comparison chapter about actually needing to compare yourself more. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's part of what I just said, which is not stopping. Like often there is a stigma around feeling envious of someone. I find this especially with women in the workplace, where it's like we should all be supporting each other. So if you are jealous of someone else, just pretend like you're not, pretend like you're just happy for them. Which, yeah, you should be supportive, but it's also totally normal to envy someone who has something you want. But yeah, in the case of my friend, it was comparing myself more, was not just stopping at the like, she has this prestigious job, I want it. It was, what is the day-to-day of that job? What does her schedule look like? Do I actually want that? And the answer was no. There's also research that shows, there was a study researchers ran where they asked people to like, how good of a runner are you? And people said, I'm not a good runner. And what they found is that people were thinking of the very best runner they knew. And so then they said, well, why don't you first write down 10 of your friends, write down their names, and think about how good they are at running. And then they said, now, how good of a runner do you think they are? And people were like, oh, I'm a decent runner, because they had actually compared themselves to a broader range of people. So I think often we just, it's like this one person who seems to be doing really well in a specific area, and we don't actually take the time to look around more or to look at people who don't have it as good as we do. And so we're just only looking like up in the sense of this person has more in this one domain, and forgetting about the fact that like you probably have more in some domain than a lot of other people, and that can help you feel better too about where you are.
This is going to sound really sneaky, that I had like a lot of issues with envy in graduate school, and particularly I'm thinking about, it was really difficult for me because I really wanted to be like very happy and supportive. I felt a lot of pressure, and I really value that. I wanted people in my life to support me too. It wasn't like I was just like blindly thinking about it, but I would always kind of like default to to be like, why can't I have that job where I manage 200 people, which I'm with you. I don't, no, I have like, it's very hard for me to manage myself and my emotions, but 200 people seems like a lot of people. But somehow I have figured out a way, and I don't know if this is helpful or works for people or something you do, Liz, where I take credit for other people's success in the sense that if something really good happens to me somehow, or something really good happens to somebody I'm close with, I just pretend that we're both having the same success at the same time. And then in ways I feel like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be admitting that I do this, but I'll say this way. So one, I can think of a specific example. After graduate school, a good friend of mine, Jenny Odell, do you know her?
Yeah, she wrote the How to Do Nothing.
Yeah. She had like a lot of, she's had a lot of success just in general, but then when How to Do Nothing came out, and it was a bestseller, and then it was on Barack Obama's list, I was like, shit, I really want to be, my life would be so much better. But if I thought about it as like sort of a network of people that we were connected with, that her good fortune was also my good fortune, it helps me be a little less envious. And again, there's no way Jenny watches these, but if she does, Jenny, I think you're great, and I'm really proud you're my friend. But okay, so back to the book. So we're totally out of time, Liz, but I just wanted to kind of maybe touch back on the sort of conclusion, or what you kind of, again, want people to feel when reading this book, and sort of the main takeaways.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, I think one of the best outcomes of the book would be a conversation like we just had, like people being like, because I actually do the same thing where one of my friends came out with a book last year and then had like a New York Times article written about her. And there are these moments where it's like exactly what you said, like, shit, I want that. But I'm also, it's cool that I feel like that's the kind of person that I'm so excited to have in my life. And so having that mentality does help with the sort of harder feelings. So I think if people just feel more comfortable sharing that, I think that will continue to normalize that these are emotions we all have. There's nothing shameful. You don't need to beat yourself up for feeling them. And then I also hope that people see the book as a helpful guide to working through hard moments and recovering from them and maybe finding meaning in them later. I think there's so much pressure and messaging in our society now that's like, if you do these 5 things, you should feel better. And if you don't feel better, that's, you failed in some way. And that, ignores structural forces. It ignores the fact that like life is long. If you're lucky, you're kind of signing up for bad days. Like we're all going to lose someone we love. We're all going to just not get something we want, have someone else succeed in a place where we're not succeeding right away. And so it's just useful to know how to move through that, and also just accept that like, it's fine. Those are, feelings come and go in waves. Success comes and goes in waves too, in some sense. So I think it's just like less pressure to always be radiantly happy and feel like life is good and you're thriving.
Can I throw you another potentially, maybe not curveball, but
yeah,
tough question? Maybe not tough. I don't know. How do you feel what's your stance on post-traumatic growth? And maybe I should define that. Or actually, I think most people, just the idea that like hard things in life are worth it because they're opportunities for growth.
Yeah, I definitely think it can be helpful. I think fundamentally making meaning, I think they've even added it as the 6th stage of grief now, is just looking back and finding something that you did gain from that experience. I really, really don't like, I think it just takes time. Like it's useful to keep that in mind as you're going through something hard, that like maybe one day I will find this meaningful, but it shouldn't be used as a weapon to minimize what you're feeling in that moment. And I think it's also true that, like losing my father-in-law, definitely it's part of like why I'm having a family now, because for me, it crystallized like, oh, this is what's really important to me is family and the people in my life. And I probably should like step back from work a little bit, because I was a huge workaholic at the time. But also like, I would have preferred to not go through that, like I wouldn't do it again. And so I think it can be comforting in those moments to be like, there might be something on the other side of this that like helps me cope with it. But it's not, I think there's a lot of things we go through in life where, I would not sign up for that, for the post-traumatic growth that it's going to give me afterwards.
Can I ask I have a couple more questions for you, because I can't stop myself. So like right now, I don't know if other people will relate to this, but what I would love to hear is something you're hopeful about for the future, something you're excited about, something to look forward to.
Yes, so I'm having a baby in like 3 weeks, which I would say hopeful and terrified. But I think I'm looking forward to just being very present in the moment, which sometimes I struggle with. And I think, for good or bad, a child sort of forces you to put some of your own anxieties to the side and just focus on, what's going on in the moment. So excited and hopeful for that new experience.
Well, Thank you so much, Liz, for doing this with me. And best of luck with the whole labor process and sort of the transition from being one being to sort of being two. I don't know when your nervous system is actually detached from each other.
Yeah.
But again, big feelings. It's a practical companion to take with you to make you feel a little less alone, and to also work through some of the hard moments or the hard feelings that you might be going through at the moment. So take care. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Also, anyone who is watching this, there is a giveaway if you just comment so that I know that you want you want the book. And then we'll be giving away 4 copies on Monday. So thank you so much, Liz.
Yeah, so nice to chat with you.
You too.